Hello and welcome to this Protection, Gender and Inclusion Learning Forum, this edition from Southern Africa, and today we'll be looking at addressing community needs through combining protection, gender and inclusion and community engagement and accountability methods. Our speakers today are Lithapelo Kutlenyane from Lesotho Red Cross, have Daniel Peter from the IFRC Southern Africa Country Cluster, and also Petronella Mugoni, also from the IFRC Country Cluster. I'm Stephen Wainwright. I'm the Social Inclusion and Protection Coordinator in Geneva in the PGI team, a part of the Inclusion, Protection and Engagement Unit. And what I wanted to start off with was coming to you, Petronella, and asking you some questions about even your own position and Daniel's position is this combined PGI and CEA role. So it's been a focus from the beginning. And if you could just sort of set the scene a bit, what was the reasons for having those two combined in your roles and in the work that you're doing in Southern Africa?
Thanks, Stephen, and good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. But just to answer your question, Stephen, I think in the beginning, when we were recruiting for my position, I initially, that position was advertised as the CEA Senior Officer for the Southern Africa Cluster Office. That's what I came in to interview for. But it was a new cluster office in the sense that we were in the process of rebuilding. It was quite small when I joined. And I think we were looking at ways of maximizing the positions that we had and the capacities that we had in the cluster office. So by the time I came for the interview, we were now having a little bit of a discussion also around mainstreaming of PGI into that role. And I think that had to do a little bit around my own previous experience and capacities in that field of PGI. I know that there were discussions around maybe linking CEA and communications, which I think had been done in other cluster offices. But I've been in a communications role at the last place that I was trying to leave, and I really wasn't looking for another communications role. I was looking more for a technical role with the main focus on the community engagement. But I think that's how it started. So you find one person who's got the capacity in community engagement that you're looking at, and maybe a bit of experience or interest in the, or maybe a little bit of experience in the other role. So that's how I landed up in this wonderful position. Thanks, Stephen.
So you've kind of created it, I think, from scratch in a way. I mean, with a lot of influence from what's been going on in the rest of the world, and there's been at different levels discussions around the benefits and also the challenges of doing that, of combining these two disciplines. I think we all know there's a bit of overlap, but there's a lot of distinction. So for the region generally, how's the team made the most of combining those two efforts? What has been the real benefits of that?
Yeah. So in the beginning, it was a bit of a struggle because, CEA is quite big and broad, and PGI is very big and very specific. With I think it's 7 subsets that come under the PGI role itself. So it was a little bit of a challenge trying to figure out how we were going to do all of this work. But I think with the supervisors that I had at the Africa level, the advice was go slow. We don't expect you to do everything at the same time. So maybe focus on, I think the advice was 2 or 3 national societies that you can really work with. Start with the ones that already have some CA capacity and then build on from. So that's what we did. But I think after a while, what I started to think was these weren't 2 separate issues. They were quite linked. And I think as I was working it out in my head and also learning more from, how the IFRC is implementing in other areas, it became quite clear that it would make sense to mainstream PGI into CEA. And what we've been, mainly focusing on, especially as we've started doing the training and the implementation, is PGI happens in the communities. The people that you're dealing with are in the communities. So if you use CEA as the entry point, then you can then, routinely mainstream PGI into there, because these are not 2 separate sets of community members or people that we are talking about. There isn't one emergency operation or one program where we can say we are going in purely to do CEA without touching on issues around, disability inclusion, gender mainstreaming. Child protection is a big one. And then the various, vulnerabilities that we find in a community, but also the various strengths that we can launch off of as we implement our program. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And that's, I think we see the benefits of mainstreaming PGI into CEA efforts and having CEA as a starting point. Do you find that there's any challenges within the team to see where one begins and one ends, because they are so closely related? And you're saying CEA is an entry point and then PGI mainstreamed into CEA. In those, just making kind of that work practically for the teams, has that been an easy task or some difficulties in that area?
I'd say for our team at the cluster level, not such a difficult one, because I think we've got quite a lot of room to maneuver and room to define or, kind of like craft the work that we're going to do. The challenge maybe might turn up at the national society level because the focal points might be different. So whereas in the cluster office, you've got the same people working both on CEA and PGI. And I know when we hired Daniel on board, it was mainly for PGI because I was struggling to juggle or to do all of the CEA and the PGI work. Daniel came on board as PGI. But very early on, I did say to Daniel, if you're interested, we can already, get you exposed to the CEA side because these areas are linked. We're also in the process of co-defining what it is that we're going to do on both ends. And I think Daniel might have, and you'll speak for himself, but he did say that he found it very, very useful to have knowledge of both areas. And then by the time that we were looking at, bringing him on board full time, it made it quite easy to make that natural progression from just PGI focused to both a PGI and CA focus. And then we made it quite, his title is PGI and CEA, mine is CEA and PGI, same thing, but just making that distinction because we're hoping that Daniel's main focus will be the support on the PGI side. That stage, so it's easier at the cluster level, a little bit trickier when we get into the national societies because the focal points tend to be different. I think it's two. Zambia used to have Esther as the focal point for CEA and PGI, but also Esther does 6 different other things as well. And then Zimbabwe has a focal point for both CEA and PGI, and that works a little bit better.
So
Just
finish.
wanted to say Botswana has got different focal points for CEA and PGI, but they work, from what we've seen, very, very closely together. So that's also a little bit easier to work on. So it's not a criticism, but to say, because the focal points are a little bit different, it's easier for us at the cluster level to consolidate the work and implement it as one.
Indeed, I mean, every context is different, of course, and that's one of the great strengths of our movement is having so many different contexts where we can work. From that framing that you did then, I mean, if we do come to Daniel now, indeed, and Daniel, you've been running quite a lot of trainings on this and combining CEA and PGI training, which is certainly, I think, it's not the only place in the world where that's happened, but you've been quite at the forefront of that. So maybe just picking up on what Petronella has been sharing, a little bit more around that. What was the reason for combining the two disciplines in one training? And what have you seen around the benefits of doing that at national society level?
Hi, thank you so much, Stephen. And it's really been a great conversation so far. I think to start off, when we talk about sort of synergizing PGI and CEA in training, I think it's important that we don't separate that from the broader context of why we try to synergize PGI and CEA. So I think, in the most immediate sense, a large reason why we synergize them within the training is because for many of the national societies in the sub-region, this training, whether for PGI or CEA or PSEA, is their first ever training on these topics. And simply from a logistical point of view, it often makes sense to combine them because it can be quite difficult to get people in a room for 2 or 3 days at a time repeatedly. So I suppose in the most immediate sense, it's one of the reasons why we combine it. Another reason, though, is that in the sense that PGI and CEA work well together generally, I think they work particularly well together theoretically, because when we talk about exclusion issues or vulnerability, or marginalization. I think there's often been a tendency in the past in humanitarian work to talk about those as things that happen at a point in time, whereas we now understand that those patterns are often systemic and often exist in communities to some extent even before a disaster occurs and certainly after a disaster occurs. And CEA is a model which allows us to address things systemically and systematically. And so I think combining those two things in the training makes a lot of sense. So as I mentioned when we were chatting before, the training we provide is generally quite introductory and broad, at least in the first training sessions that we provide. We don't think that's a particular problem, especially because we are often in these trainings training people from a number of different profiles, from programmatic staff to support staff to staff and volunteers. And so it's quite important to have sort of a broad overview. But, you know, just to mention that in previous trainings that we've had people from volunteers to the Secretary General participating in the training. And so we generally try to, while combining the two processes, still have a broad enough overview of each one of them. And then, of course, you know, the intention is then to follow up. And then I think when you speak about sort of the benefits of the trainings, and I know we'll be speaking later about sort of the successful parts specifically, but I think the benefits of combining them generally is that most of the training that we provide is supposed to be capacity building training, what we call the training of trainers. And so when we combine those two approaches, we allow not only for staff and volunteers to train other volunteers and staff, but we make sure that whatever programmatic capacity they're in, they have a decent enough understanding of both departments, but also the interplay between both departments, so that no matter who they're training, they have some, you know, sort of contextual understanding of how the two work together. And then the second thing I think, which is quite useful about combining them, is that we try to be quite responsive to the context of each national society. And so although the training tends to be, you know, especially in the introductory stages, quite, you know, fairly broad overviews of the training, we're also quite cognizant of the fact that, especially when it comes to PGI issues and also CEA issues, the context which each national society has have very important effects on how we roll out those programs and also how we roll out that training. And so when we combine those two approaches, it's often a lot easier to engage with national societies in the training and also before the training about what their specific needs are and perhaps what we need to focus on. So for example, when we were training the Lesotho Red Cross, child protection issues are a particular issue in Lesotho, but it's also something that the national society is particularly engaged on, as I'm sure Lithapelo will be speaking about. And so combining those two approaches meant we could narrow down on the specific areas of, you know, sensitive feedback mechanisms, for example, that we needed to focus on.
Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, that's very interesting to hear about, you know, how we take a broad framework of synergizing the two and then start to implement it at a country level. And you were talking a bit there about adapting each training for each context, which of course is always a good thing to do. And the Lesotho example, it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about some of those specific trainings and how they went. You were mentioning before about in Lesotho, I think it was quite focused around a school feeding program. That was part of the context of the training. And maybe you could just share a bit about how, in the training context, and then in the follow-up work around the training context, how do you you know, really integrate quite, you know, broad principles into something very, very pragmatic like school feeding and perhaps other examples?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I think actually the school feeding program project in Lesotho was a really good opportunity for us to integrate those you know, broad overview lessons into something quite practical. So one of the specific aspects or unique aspects of the school feeding program is that it involves 5 schools across a district, each of which have quite specific contexts about the needs that they have, about the style of school management, about the entity that runs the school, whether it's the government or a church school or things like that, but also have communities which have particular outlooks and needs and things like that. And so running this project, the overwhelming majority of the work that's being done in the first few months of the project has been engagement with communities whether teachers, parents, traditional leaders, government officials, about the specific needs which each of them have. So when we ran the training beforehand, we managed to deal a lot with sort of how to run focus group discussions, for example, in a way that's not only effective from a CEA point of view, but is also cognizant of the vulnerabilities which certain participants in focus group discussions might have.
And what kind of ways did you do that, Daniel? Like in the focus group discussion, how did you address them?
So I mean, a very practical example is one of the pieces of training advice we often give, is that when we run focus group discussions or generally meetings with community members, in the past, what would often happen was humanitarian organizations would put men and women and elders and younger people in the community all together in one room. I think often in a sort of a well-meaning intent to have people all participating democratically. One of the consequences of that is often that people who experience sort of less power in a community might be reluctant to voice their concerns, especially when there's a fear of retaliation. So one of the pieces of training we gave was about having, for example, gender-specific focus group discussions, or focus group discussions that engage with elders separately, so that people are more willing to engage. And that, I think, is quite a good example of uniquely synergizing CEA and PGI point of view together. And that was quite important for the school feeding project, because a number of the focus group discussions that we've had to have, or that the Lesotho Red Cross has had, were specifically dealing not only with children and not only with community members, but also with elders and school boards and things like that.
Great, that's good to hear about how we, really make sure that those trainings are being meaningful and give some practical tips and advice. It all comes down to practicalities at the end of the day, right? A lot of very useful thinking to arrive at a simple advice of separating people out at times when that's necessary, and sometimes bringing them back together again, of course. There were some other elements around the ways that I think in a lot of the trainings people really engaged around PSEA, prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. And both of you, Petronella and Daniel, mentioned a bit already about not addressing those kind of themes sort of in a vacuum, right? But as part of that whole synergizing. So could you maybe share something about the engagement of participants on that theme and how the combined training helped to address the complexity of that issue of sexual exploitation and abuse? To you, Petronella, sure, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So maybe just thanks, that's a good question. The other answer to, I suppose, why are we combining the activities, and Daniel has already spoken about, the utility of time. It's also, like a funding consideration. If we can use our funds more effectively by maybe doing one mission to do one training. So what we are doing is, and we've done training in Namibia, South Africa, and Lesotho for now, is we are doing 3-day training on CEA, PGI, and PSEA. And then we will typically use budgets from, of course, with permission. If it's the CEA budget and if we can negotiate for an extra couple of days for PGI and PSEA, then that's what we will do. So the first day will be on CEA, community engagement. And when we start talking about the feedback mechanism, for example, we'll start talking about sensitive complaints and the links of CEA with PSEA. When we get to day 2 and we're speaking around PGI, we are reminding participants that these are the same, community members that we've spoken about or, of under the CEA, and accountability is part of a PSEA function as well. So we are making the links throughout the 3 days and dealing with these issues as combined rather than, separate. Then we are making the distinction in the PGI section between sexual and gender-based violence prevention, which happens in the community among community members, and which is something that us as humanitarians will respond to, but which is quite different from PSEA, which is something that us as humanitarians might potentially perpetrate within communities. And as part of our accountability, it's about briefing each other about our responsibilities, discussing what we can and can't do, and then holding each other to account. So the PSEA work is especially important at this moment because we're in the process of supporting a number of national societies to develop PSEA policy. So we are using the training to introduce the concept, get the buy-in, identify PSEA focal persons, identify PSEA committees. At some times, if we have the time to actually do the PSEA assessment, which we managed to do in Namibia, but not for South Africa and Lesotho, but that's something we're going to do afterwards towards that policy development process. Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Petronella. Maybe, Daniel, you have something else to add on how that worked in the training context. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just to speak to your question about sort of not speaking about PSEA and these issues in a vacuum, and also the engagement from participants. Something we certainly found in the PSEA components of the training was that there was a lot of interest from National Society staff and volunteers in sexual harassment in the workplace. And in every single training we've run so far, that's come up more so than perhaps the trainings had catered for. And I think it's actually quite understandable, to be honest, that would be a concern for National Society staff and volunteers. And personally, given that I have a legal background, I find it relatively straightforward and simple enough to answer legal issues or legal questions that people might ask in the trainings. But what was a bit of a difficulty was that we have a lack of standardized PSEA, and even more broadly, a lack of standardized PGI training material for use with national societies. And so there'll be sort of a moment in the training where you want to give an answer, but you're not 100% sure whether it's in line with IFRC guidelines and standards. But you also don't want to leave someone sort of in limbo. So that's been a little bit of a challenge, but overall, I'd certainly say that it's been really useful having these trainings to see what is needed by National Society staff and volunteers, not only in terms of our training capacity, but also in terms of recommendations to sort of broader offices about the development of content going forward.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, noted the difficulties and challenges, and that was going to be my last question to you, actually, before we come to Lithapelo to talk a bit about Lesotho. But of course, building up anything as complex as that, there's going to be challenges and mistakes made. What would you, what will you do differently in the next set of trainings? What did you learn from the first set that you think, okay, that really didn't work, we should do that slightly differently next time?
Yeah, that's a really great question. You know, something I'm actually quite glad we had this Global Learning Forum after a few training sessions that we've had recently. Something that Petronella and I realized or became apparent is that the level to which you can presume knowledge on the part of participants, and also that you can presume consistent standardized knowledge across the participants in a training needs to perhaps be revised. So we will often enter a training sort of based on the presumption that there are certain things that are agreed to be true by everyone in the training, certain basic standards or certain sort of basic principles. And it becomes apparent that not only may the level of sort of knowledge about PSEA or PGI be different across national societies, but within national societies, there might be, you know, very much varying levels of knowledge among participants. And so I think what we've worked out going forward is that something we need to do at the beginning of trainings, and also throughout the trainings, is working on gauging and ascertaining what the levels of knowledge are for participants going forward. So we've got a pretty good way of doing that already for PSEA. So before and after we give PSEA trainings, we have an assessment that basically asks the same questions, and we use it to determine how much knowledge has increased, but it's also really useful in determining what the areas are that we need to focus on in the PSEA training. And I think going forward, we'll be looking at trying to work on similar ways of gauging and ascertaining prior levels of CEA and PGI knowledge going forward. And then I think, of course, the other thing in terms of just the challenges is that although there's certainly a lot of overlap between CEA and PGI, they are still discrete concepts. And so I think, you know, it's important going forward that we make sure we adequately address each concept, especially at its broadest, sort of most high level overview, before we start to look at the synergies and engagements. Because I think sometimes what I noticed was participants might have become a bit confused when we hadn't sort of narrowed down the very basic concepts before we looked at how they interacted.
Thanks, Daniel, very clear. Petronella, you want to add something?
Thanks. Yes, Stephen. So I think what I wanted to add was maybe one of the ways that you asked, what did we start doing? I think we've had to be quite nimble as we've been doing the trainings So I know when we did the first one for Namibia, we realized that it might be a good idea to use the same scenarios that we'd used from the CEA training, which is quite standard. We use the same scenarios on day 2 for the PGI session. So we'd say the same, scenario where you've got this emergency situation in this fictional country with a fictional national society that's responding. Let's then, respond to these PGI focused questions because you've already gotten the CEA. So I think in that way, you kind of, create that golden thread between CEA and PGI. We don't know if it's something that we can translate to the PSEA content. It hasn't been necessary so far. We've also started doing a pre-training survey, but only for the PSEA side, because we've also realized that PSEA, or at least for us, is quite a new area. There isn't a lot of documentation out there. So as part of our contribution towards maybe lessons or documentation around PSEA, we send out a 10-question survey on SurveyMonkey before the PSEA module. And then we are trying to assess the knowledge levels between, pre-training and after, because we realize not a lot of us have been trained on PSEA. And then after that, we'll write a little report based on just that one PSEA component of it. So in Namibia, we found, for example, like Daniel has already mentioned, sexual harassment is probably something that we might want to include into the, any training curriculum for PSEA for national societies. South Africa is telling us that we need a stronger focus on SGBV. We do know that SGBV sits a little bit outside of PSEA, but it came up so much that it maybe bears adding a little bit more content on SGBV. Lesotho is telling us that we've got an interest in child protection, but also interestingly, sexual minorities and how we can adequately respond, especially where we don't have a strong policy basis for sexual minorities. Perhaps if we are outlawing, same-sex relationships, how do humanitarian organizations respond? So I just wanted to add that we are trying to document as we go along, but maybe let's not get the hopes up very, very high. It's little pieces of documentation that we've got.
I think every little helps, right, as they say, and thank you to both of you for that really great insight into the context in Southern Africa and the training that's been going on there. And then noted indeed, I mean, that kind of standardization of material certainly helps, and that's of course in process both on the CEA side and the PGI side. There's quite a lot of standardized training that has been evolving over the years. I think being revised right now actually for a release in a few weeks time, really, with a sort of new set with a very clear, hopefully, pathway on what training can be used in which context, just to note that for people on the call if they're interested in accessing standard PGI training, which has been informed indeed by all of those experiences that you've been sharing from the regional level. So thank you for that very much. Let us turn now to Lithapelo, who is with us and turning on his camera, and hello again. Great to have you with us. And we've been discussing, the four of us rather, around these issues for a little while now. One of the things we wanted to delve into a little bit more was how CEA and PGI are being applied in your context in Lesotho. So the first question I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've been working on child protection issues, on MHPSS, and for quite some time. So when we're looking in a country context at integrating CEA and PGI, it's very much about addressing the issues around exclusion, of course. So could you just give a bit of an overview of what are the main exclusion issues in Lesotho? Who is being left behind and who is being left out in the communities?
In Lesotho, at the community level and at national level, we have a challenge with the girl child and young boys who are reaching the manhood, and the LGBTs, the matrix groups. These are the groups that are highly marginalized and challenged due to the fact that due to the lockdowns, they are not actually allowed to convey their own views. They are segregated. And it has been an escalating issue when we gather statistics at the community level.
Right. Okay. And you've been talking about some of the other ways that people are experiencing exclusion, particularly there's a linguistic minorities, those not speaking the
We
national
have in the
language.
southern region, which is teaching, where we have the Tutsi population and the Xhosa population, due to the fact that they are not speaking the same language and they follow relatively different religions and traditional ethics. These groups are highly segregated and they are not included even in planning, in initiating initiatives and actual rolling out of initiatives. And these are groups that we want to include as part of our rollout of activities.
Okay, and some of the ways that those groups, so I mean the linguistic minorities and also the people from the LGBT community, and you were mentioning also people who are not in the elite, so not with a surname belonging to the royal family, those people who don't have a lineage with chieftainship, those who are not in the elite, basically. And those people are more severely affected by some of the traditional ethical practices and beliefs. And could you tell us a bit about the initiation schools and the effect that those practices have on particularly young women and young men?
Actually, in the communities during these initiation schools, if the gay communities are involved, they are highly marginalized, even abused, due to the fact that they are not considered as people of ethical doings. So this has been a request from the community to say, how best can we actually protect these people from being abused and being marginalized?
Right.
Because in our traditional ethics, the secrets that are done in these initiation schools are not actually reported. But we have heard from the community that there is high numbers of segregation, there is high number of stigmatization. Also, there is high number of physical and verbal abuse that are happening in these initiation schools. And even if these schools are joined by people who are adults, but they are of gay minorities, they are not actually being recognized as men. They are highly segregated.
And the initiation schools themselves is part of the kind of transition from childhood to adulthood, right? And there's
that is very true.
Yeah, and so
people go into this, to actually test their manhood and to give leverage to actually go out into the communities and say, now we are actually adults who can be considered as part of the community to be leaders, even to make decisions.
And I think you were mentioning before, if for those people who don't go through the initiation school, it affects them for their whole life. They never have that kind of full status, and they'll will always.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for that kind of vision of the different ways that people are excluded. Of course, every community has the ways that sadly some people are excluded. When we're looking then at how Lesotho Red Cross is addressing some of those issues, you talked about child protection, about the difficulties for girls and also for boys who are being left out of the community in some way by doing a lot of being sent to do herding practices and then not being able to, the school enrollment dropping quite a lot. Also these issues of violence and abuse and so on through the initiation schools linked to traditional ethical practices. So how is CEA and PGI helping to address those issues for Lesotho Red Cross?
First of all, in that regard, let me thank the IFRC for bringing these two thematic issues at the right time. Because when you have the CEA as an approach, you actually get the people who are out there, the vulnerable groups, to actually be part of the planning, be part of the inception of the project. In that, you get commitment, you get buy-in from the people. That is a very strong move. Now, when you get the PGI, that's when you bring the people together to say, who are marginalized? How best can we involve them? How best can we hear their voices and work together with them so that each and every partner, community leaders, families, and the whole community can actually hear the views of these people, because on their own, they are not powerful enough, to convey their messages. But working together with them actually bring that platform for them to actually be heard. So I believe these two concepts are a good move that we can actually use, but we need stronger tracking indicators so that we can see what differences we have made on the ground.
Thank you. Very, very clear. I think you had been talking a lot about how it's been difficult without the CEA practices to really get all of the stakeholders involved, and then applying that has worked. And one of the examples you were talking about was one specific and very well established project in Lesotho of the community-based child protection pathway, we could call it, where a lot of childcare facilitators. So just to give a bit of a background for those who might not know, I mean, this developed out of many years of Lesotho Red Cross working with orphan and vulnerable children affected by HIV/AIDS. And from that, a lot of volunteers and staff called childcare facilitators were developed. And this has evolved now into a referral pathway for many issues of child protection, including child marriage. Could you just talk us through a bit the benefits and how that referral pathway works in terms of all of the different stakeholders involved in that?
First of all, it's been quite a long history, because back in 2016, that's when Lesotho Red Cross was initially and mainly working on child protection. We developed our own national child protection strategy. That was from 2015 to 2020. That means it has now lost the shelf life. But since then, we have actually been able to develop holistic collaborations and networks with government ministries, with non-governmental organizations at district level, at national level, even at community level. Then we have also networked with CBOs, that is community-based organizations. We were able to bring in chiefs or community leaders, including teachers, nurses, village health workers, and also what we call the community policing forums. Now with this, we were able to set some basis to say, how best can we have case management on the ground, case reporting on the ground, even actual psychosocial support helping people who are challenged or abused or marginalized. So with this, we have set up what we call the help desk at community level. These are set up at the chief's offices, even at local government offices. Now, secondly, we have set up what we call suggestion boxes that are set up in almost every institution in the community. That includes the health centers, the chief's place, the local government, even bars and shops, so that each and every person can feel free to say, where could I report the case? How best could I get help or information? Now they feel free to write a short message and then input into that suggestion box. Then our volunteers will actually go on a monthly basis or on a bi-weekly basis to open these suggestion boxes and get the feedback. Then they report it to the headquarters, where our PMER office will actually sift through the information and see which ones need their child protection, which one need inclusion, which one needs psychosocial support or PFA. Then they are worked into accordingly and they are referred to different departments. Now, this move has been working relatively so well that we think it's a way to go, because having worked on these cases and then putting them in our management reports and case management forms, we actually network with partners like the ministries now to refer these people so that they can get help, they can get information. Even those perpetrators who are into rape, into abuse, they're actually being brought to justice to actually be dealt with. And also, apart from this, we have the toll-free numbers that we are coordinating together with the Ministry of the Police. And then we have one for Ministry of Social Development, and we have one for Ministry of Health, and we have one specifically for the Lesotho Red Cross. And these numbers are relatively similar So the communities are made aware of these numbers, they are given information, and one can use these numbers even without data or airtime. They can call from their mobile and then they get assistance 24 hours a day, and they are referred 2-3 days later. But the challenge that we still have is that the wheels in the government take time to turn. So we are trying to find a coordination niche where we can actually work together and see how best we can work into this case relatively faster. Now, yesterday we had a meeting called the District Child Protection Teams meeting in the district of Lithapelo, where we have this initiated school feeding project. Now, every partner was there: Master of High Court, social development, education, food security, everybody. Now, here we agreed that we should be committed and we should actually sign a treaty and say, how best can we work together to resolve these challenges so that we strengthen our child protection initiatives? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lithapelo. It's such a comprehensive mechanism. I think it stands the test of time from having been developed over many years and continually adding other elements. And maybe you could also share a bit about, coming back to that theme of how community engagement ensures that the system works most effectively. For example, of course, there's a bit of a tension, isn't there? We want to work with chiefs and we want to work with police and we want to work with authorities, but they're not always, let's say, not always the most well adapted to look at the needs of the most vulnerable and the marginalized. It's maybe, we need to help the police and the government to do that. So could you talk a bit about some of the ways, for example, the COSA groups and the LGBT, how the Lesotho Red Cross has been making sure that they're also involved in that referral network?
We have actually made the move now where we have awareness raising campaigns, and we bring these partners because they have their own associations or institutions which are working with them. Now we are not working with them, we are collaborating, and we are raising awareness so that people know about these different vulnerable groups. Also, we have calendars, we have leaflets, we have gazebos that have messages, depicting this set of marginalized groups. Now, we also use the media houses, the television, the radio, and the newspapers, so that people are aware of the challenges that these focus groups face. And I think slowly we are getting to be heard. But the most important is the fact that at policy level, we still need those policymakers, the politicians, to be part of this bigger picture, so that if people can hear from the politicians or the leaders, then the message can be conveyed in a better manner, and everybody will take leverage to recognize and say, we alluded to that. So we need to bring our policies forth and include policymakers and politicians.
Yes, indeed. We can never get very far if we don't have support at all those levels. And I think, it's a bit like the role of Lesotho Red Cross, like many national societies, is really bridging between the two, between the community and the authorities and other people who can support those networks. You were saying also that one of the main ways that we can do that, one of the main ways that the referral pathway works, is because it's so reliant on community feedback and the holistic approach. Can you say a little bit about how you maintain that continual kind of feedback from the community and how we use that community engagement to make sure that the protection issues and inclusion issues are really being addressed most effectively?
What makes CEA works the most is the actual M&E and the follow-up.
Say that again, please.
Actual M&E and the follow-up. You need regular interactions with the community. You need to have community commitment. You need to involve them from the initial planning so that they know what is to be done. They are part of it. They become part of the solution in that manner. So CEA, it is very important as the first step or the approach. Now, having done this, we have what we call community-based trainings. Now we involved these key players, the police, Minister of Education, Minister of Health, Minister of Social Development, and we make sure that school board members, the teachers, the chiefs themselves and the local government are buying into this initiative. Now, once you have that consolidation of these key players, they don't want to be seen, falling back. Everybody wants to be seen doing something so that they can get that voting from the community to say, our chief is actually on our side, he's actually making some changes. Now, once you have that, and CEA works accordingly and relatively good to help initiate that move. So it's a very good move that actually works on the ground. But it is easier said than done. We need to really be robust in our application of CEA so that it really works at community level.
Indeed, thanks for that reminder to be robust. There's sometimes the perception from outside that both CEA and PGI are a little bit loose, right? A little bit fluffy. And actually, I think we've been hearing a lot today about how they're very pragmatic and very practical. And maybe we'll end one more question to you, Lithapelo, before we see if there's some questions from the those attending. We talked a bit already around child marriage in Lesotho, but maybe you could just talk a bit about the different gender aspects of child marriage in Lesotho, how girls are affected, how boys are affected, and how Lesotho Red Cross is addressing those issues in this combined and holistic way.
Now, what we have seen happening, especially after this COVID-19 lockdowns, which were challenging livelihoods, challenging the movement, restrictions, we have seen that many girls have dropped out in schools, and the numbers are scary. Because yesterday we got data from Botabote that out of 60 schoolgirls who left, around 30 of them, that is 50%, actually went into early marriage. Why do they do this? They do this in regard to actually getting support from the marrying family, so that they get food, they get financial support, they get protection, and so on and so forth. Now, this is an alarming rate, So the boys also are challenged for the fact that when there is poverty in the household, boys are sent to work, to herd cattle, to go to South Africa and work in the farms so that they can bring something home. Now, these are the dynamics that we are having in terms of boys and then girls. And most of the boys are actually segregated to say that instead of sending the boys to school, it should be girls that are sent to school. And this is hurting, and it's not protective in terms of protecting the boy child. Now, the Lesotho Red Cross is working together with other organizations, the ministry is in place to actually protect these young people at that stage. And we actually had the Ministry of Education giving commitment that they have opened the doors so that each and every child, either a girl or a boy, can access free education. And there were other key players there like the World Vision, the Baylor, and the Sentebale organizations. They were saying they have a portfolio of bursaries where actually the girl child can be supported, even the boys, to actually go to school. Even if they don't have funds, they have educational support that is holistic and intensive to support these people. So we are going to network with these partners so that we can refer these young people who are out of school so that they can access it.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, and then just the last sort of point on that, it was very interesting to hear about how, by addressing those issues of girls dropping out of school and entering into early marriage, and the the issues of boys also low school enrollment and being sent to South Africa to do herding work to bring income. Whatever the issue was, I think you've seen that when you try to address one issue, you very quickly see all of the other issues behind it, the MHPSS issues, the child protection issues, also PSEA issues. Is there something you could maybe share with us about either successes or maybe even some mistakes that were made in the past, and ways that we can make sure that we really honor the interconnectedness of all of those factors?
The mistake that I've seen at community level is that we need to involve women more.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you need to bring women on board, make them stronger, empower them so that they can speak in one voice and they can be heard. In the initial stage, it was actually men who were addressing issues of livelihoods. But now that has changed. Women are on the forefront when it comes to taking care of the family. So we need to empower them. We need to bring them on board. And when we do our public gatherings, we need also to ask women, do they feel free to address issues of protection, inclusion, where in the presence of men? Then we'll get more information and we'll get commitment and buy-in from the women. That is an area that we need to look into.
Well, thank you, Lithapelo. That seems a very good note on which to maybe move to some comments and questions from the rest of the people who are here. And it's great to see quite a collection of people. If you didn't already, please do maybe mention where you're calling from in the chat, and perhaps you have a comment, a question to any one of the speakers. Also, of course, I'm happy to answer should there be any question for the Geneva Global team. But yeah, the floor is open. It's always maybe difficult to be the first one to go, but if anybody has something to bring up. I see Esther, maybe you want to just open your microphone and turn on the camera if you're still with us, and share what you were sharing in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
It's gone off again. Okay.
Yeah.
My question is on child protection, which is something that's actually close to my heart. I don't know, how has Lesotho dealt with the situation of families where there's a lot of child abuse? We have that quite a lot here in Zambia. There's a lot of child abuse, and parents, especially mothers, are put at a position and situation where they have to keep quiet because the family wants to keep it within. But you see, this child is stressed, this child is abused, this child really wants to scream out, but they have, they're at a position of, let's not say anything, let's just keep it in the family. And you find that the perpetrators usually are family members. I don't know how does or has Lesotho dealt with such situations?
Yes, thank you, Esther. In Lesotho, we have made some strides in this regard for the fact that within the law offices and the police department, we have an office called CGPU. This is Child Gender and Protection Unit. These are highly trained police units. They even are trained in counseling and psychosocial support, even in children, in child handling ethics and practicality. Now, we work highly closely with this unit, but the challenge that we have, like you are saying, is that the cases have been brought forward, the perpetrators have been arrested, but when it comes to the magistrate courts, that is another sector that we need to bring on board. Some of the cases take a long time to be dealt with, and we see perpetrators after 2 or 3 weeks being sent out to work among the communities. Now, this was an area that was raised as a challenge, but we have had a lot of successes because many perpetrators were brought to book and their cases were taken forward. But we really need to work with the magistrate courts to address this issue of releasing perpetrators early.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Lithapelo. Yeah, that's great to hear that advance. And good to hear about how, just acknowledging the need for training of all the partners, and that it's not dealing with such issues is not something that can be done in an improvised way, right? It really needs that expertise from the different sides. I wonder if I might be so bold as to invite Neo from Botswana Red Cross to just, if you had any comment on what our speakers have been talking about, because I know you also in Botswana have done quite a lot of work at combining PGI and CEA together in the COVID response. If there's any question you had or a comment, Neo, if you're still with us. If not, no, of course, no problem. And maybe somebody else has a question, but happy to hear a question from maybe Botswana, from Gaborone.
Stephen, there's a hand raise.
Oh, thanks, Nasli. I can't see the hand raise. Oh, it's Audrey. Yes.
Audrey.
Go ahead, Audrey.
Hi. Good morning, and thank you very much for this brilliant presentation. It's really great to hear how the project is going and developed from the initiatives previously. I was curious to hear a little more about coordination, and especially you mentioned this great meeting yesterday, gathering so many different line ministries and partners. And I wanted to understand whether it is also linked to national or subnational working groups on child protection, whether basically this is strengthening the child protection system overall and you're able to coordinate with everyone. And also, and maybe it's something that is a little different, but are you also focusing on preparedness and developing potential scenarios, mapping those risks? And you mentioned notably child marriage now. Is it something that came up maybe stronger even within the COVID crisis, and are you taking it forward for future potential crises? Thank you.
That's a very broad question. We are lucky in Lesotho for the fact that the Ministry of Social Development is on the forefront and leading in terms of coordination. These coordinations are done at the national level, at district level, even at community level, where they use what we call community lay counselors. Now, we agreed in this yesterday meeting that we should among ourselves have 5 thematic areas that include child protection, that include health, education, social development, and then inclusion. Those are the 5 steps that we'll be looking into. Now, from the partners that we have, NGOs, ministries, community-based organizations, even the leaders themselves, we are going to form groups that will be working specifically on these 5 thematic areas. This will bring us up to speed, and it will actually help in the trainings that we are going to hold in the future to actually train these different stakeholders on PGI, PSEA, CEA, and also include mental health and psychosocial support, because some people don't know about these different thematic areas. Now, having done so, we'll then have tools on the ground to say how best can we work on the cases, even report them, so that we get help from each and every key partner that is on the ground. And another issue that we look into was to actually establish what we call information referral service document, so that we know what Lesotho Red Cross is doing, what World Vision is doing, what Baylor is doing, so that each and every person in the community can be able to access this information and refer whoever needs help, so that it is easy to get help. Thank you.
And just for clarification, it's always impressive how clearly you answer all the questions, Lithapelo. It's almost as if it was scripted, but this is very much off the cuff, but you have clearly a very organized mind, more than mine. I'll come now to Neo. You wanted to come in, Neo.
Morning, everyone. Neo here. I wanted to respond to a question that was asked about how they are dealing. It was coming from Zambia, how they were dealing with child abuse. I thought I could also give some of the lessons learned, because we have a project on child abuse that we're partnered with UNICEF, and the way the project is tailored is such that we have about 85 volunteers who were trained on protection, on PCA. It is actually, it's a project on child health, and then child abuse is also part of that. First of all, they were trained so that they can be the ones that are on the forefront within their communities, because they understand their communities better in terms of dynamics, in terms of culture, in terms of languages. And these communities are communities with marginalized populations due to maybe language or maybe the tribe and all those. So maybe most of them are communities that are further from major towns, and that sometimes they don't have radio transmission, there's no electricity, there are no things that can actually facilitate communication, and also health education through radios, through TV, through other platforms. So these volunteers were engaged and they were trained, and they go household to household, engaging families on issues of child abuse, how much they understand. And the way it is divided is such that, first of all, they do what we call a rapid assessment. In each community, we take 20% of all the children that are in that community. And we got that number from Ministry of Health and Wellness. We say in this community, we have got 300 children. So the rapid assessment, we just sample 60 children, for example, and then the guardian or the caregivers or parents, they actually are enrolled in that rapid assessment to actually find out what they know about child abuse, what if they know the types of child abuse, if they would report cases of child abuse, if they think there's child abuse issues in their communities or regions, who would they report to, and how they normally resolve the issues of child abuse. That question of how they normally resolve issues of childhood is because, I don't know whether to say it's our African culture or it's our culture only here in Botswana. We normally believe in solving issues at family level. And as such, even issues of child abuse, you find they are not reported. They don't go out as much as you would. And because we believe we'll solve them at family level. Firstly, because people shun at you and look at you with a negative perception if they hear that there are issues of child abuse, defilement, rape, and any other child abuse. I would say defilement, rape, or sexual abuse because that's the most common type here that is normally reported or heard about. And then there is also an issue of why would they not report issues of child abuse, and who do they think can assist them in terms of issues of child abuse? Would they talk to their children about issues of child abuse? So that is the rapid assessment. We are targeting the total number that will be targeted under this rapid assessment will be 2,000. So we're then going to analyze that data and find out how much people understand about child abuse and all those, the way I've just elaborated the questions, because that will help us to understand our communities better when we talk about child abuse than just going there and teaching them. Maybe they understand, maybe there are other types of issues surrounding child abuse in their communities. They need to say them out. Just yesterday, I was in one community which has a certain marginalized group, and they said something interesting about abuse, children being enrolled in issues of rituals and stuff. And they wanted to know if that is a type of child abuse and how we can classify that one. So that was also very interesting because if you go into communities, you tend to get a deeper sense, deeper meaning, deeper practices of other things that are not actually theoretical or written in the book. So you get something from the horse's mouth as to what is really happening in the communities. And then secondly, then when they finish, now they have a risk communication and community engagement on COVID-19 and child health, and also demand creation on COVID-19 vaccine. We have also included the issue of child abuse. That is where now they go house to house or family to family, and they will include caregivers and children that are 10 years and above. Our target is 11,000 children and 9,000 caregivers, although the last one that we did last year, we didn't reach the target of 11,000 children. We were short by 3,000, I think. But part of us not being able to part of us us not being able to reach the target was that in some areas, you find at the clinic, they will record 500 under 5s or 500 children in that community. But they record them because they only see them when they come for child development monitoring or immunization or school every month. But the child does not necessarily stay in that community. They stay in the nearby ranches, farms, cattle posts, or villages or fields. They just stay out where there's there are no basic, that there's no clinic or health services. They only come to that clinic or that facility for child weighing or monitoring or that. So they will then record them. By the time we go into that community, you find that you don't actually find that number because the number is not, the number of those children are not in that community. So it was also an eye-opener or mistake that we did, that we didn't really include all the communities that are surrounding. We just concentrated in a certain community, and you find that in that certain community, there are other catchment areas where you normally find your children, especially in certain cultures or certain tribes. They have cattle posts, they have your fields, they have your very rural areas where they would have the children. Sometimes in the farms, waking, and they've taken the children with them. So that is also something that we wanted to look at. But issues of child abuse, we also have them here, especially in rural areas. And it is also one thing that we are looking at. Lessons learned from other national societies such as Lesotho and others that you have been collaborating with or talking to, at least in issues of how do you manage this issue, is that we also have the child protection unit in our police department, but we have not taken full advantage of it. We've only been attending sort of meetings with them on a quarterly basis, but we have not taken full advantage of having also our volunteers being part of that that unit, being trained, at least even by them, to know from the legal point of view, what is it that the law says about child protection and issues surrounding child abuse, which is also something that we want to partake in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. That's I think Lithapelo is going to make a comment on that. Just before you do, Lithapelo, just to say that I think, of course, within the region and within the world, we see a lot of commonality. Certainly, the issue of keeping things within the family is, I think, a universal problem that needs a local context to address it, but it's of course a very common problem everywhere. But maybe Lithapelo, you wanted to comment a bit on, we talked a lot about the traditional healers, the ethical practices, and the ways in which we need to really understand where those practices are coming from and who is what the power issues are around that, to be able to address them. Over to you, Lithapelo.
Yes, Steve, I was highly interested in that highlighted area to say that since we are going to do our review of our child protection strategy and other policies, I want to urge Botswana, because I see some similarities there with Lesotho. But what we gathered from the policy is that no child negligence, abuse, or atrocities should be treated as family matters. These are legal issues, then they should be brought forward. Now, anyone who takes his own legal matter to say we can deal this, we can work with, on this as a family, is also a perpetrator. Now, I would also like to urge Botswana, and then maybe with the help of Dr. Petronella, that when we revise our policy, we should also include these issues of traditional beliefs and ethics, to say that in our strategy, we commit everybody not to work matters at family level, because we have heard that there are cases of traditional leaders, even traditional doctors, who don't want cases to be reported. They always say they will resolve them at community level. And there at community level, it will depend on how noticeable or powerful the person is. And it ends up not being worked on, even if the person is a serious perpetrator who is abusing many children. So we need to really have a similar setup so that we can easily, legally, brought these cases forward, not to be worked at family level.
Thanks, Lithapelo, very clear. Let me go to, there's another hand up from Becky.
Sorry, before they go, Stephen,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, yes.
I just wanted to jump in. What Lithapelo is speaking about, the policies and the inclusion of traditional structures and people, is that I think an offshoot of the training and the way that we've been integrating PGI, CEA and PSEA is that we started these conversations with a lot of national societies around policy development. So we could, currently looking at PSEA policies, gender and diversity policies, child protection policies, whether updating them or starting from scratch, as well as CEA strategies. So, the training, I think, has sparked a lot of interest and a lot of knowledge from the national societies that we're missing this policy or we don't have a framework for this, and those requests around trying to get them into place. So what we've started doing also is trying to link up national societies with others that have done the work already. We're having the conversation around linking up Lithapelo with Esther for guidance on the gender and diversity policy, because whereas we could potentially give that information and that guidance, Esther would probably be able to give it better because they've just finished their gender and diversity policy. Thanks.
Wonderful. It's very heartwarming to see peer learning in action, and indeed nothing better than learning from someone who's done it. On that note,
if I could just to jump on one more time.
Just be brief though, Daniel, because we have a little time left and 2 questions. So just be brief if you could.
No problem at all. I just wanted to add on just to say that I think also when it comes to these policy development processes and learning processes, I think often the most useful and important information is obtained either spontaneously or in methods that are not necessarily directly structured to obtain that information. So we certainly do have engagement processes regularly with our national societies, but I think as is evidenced by this call, a lot of the most important information comes out when we're sort of having another conversation. I think especially because our understandings of what our child protection concerns and what our PGI concerns might differ. And so people often provide information in times where they weren't even aware that the information was particularly useful.
Thank you for that, Daniel. Absolutely. We often hear the most when we're not really asking directly the question, actually. As we heard from Botswana on the COVID work, and all of the issues tend to start tumbling out. Becky, you've had your hand up for a while. What's your question?
Thank you. Great presentation to both Dr. Mugoni and Daniel. I think you captured most of the things. So,
okay. If you want to turn on your video, Becky, then we would be good if you can. If not, it doesn't matter. But
okay, no problem.
Great.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think they've captured most well, and Dr. Mugoni, just jump in now. I wanted to maybe stress the importance of having those, components of PC, like CA, PGI, and while also looking at PCI at the same time, so they cover a lot of information at the same time, which is a great approach that I've experienced lately. But then the issue around, I wanted to come in a question to Tapelo and also Neo in Botswana around child protection. I think it's one of the most sensitive and also most important issues that we should play a hand. And lately, South Africa started an organization called Childline and the Department of Social Development. They've launched a certain toll-free number that will work throughout the region. I know the number is also used by the Childline Zimbabwe. Also, Tanzania, they are using this 116. I want to know if ever they're toll-free or there are any ways to incorporate this number, because child protection cut across, they are abducted to other states, and also overseas, some of the countries that are using the same number. If they can maybe, what's the status quo around using the same number across, the region, and also Africa abroad, since Tanzania is up there, they are using the same number. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Lithapelo or Petronella have something to respond on this question? Go ahead, Lithapelo. It's around the toll-free numbers and how to make sure.
I think that one for us will be a bit challenging to use the regional one, because we follow the laws that are set aside by our communication authority and the telecom and Vodacom services in country. So I think it's something that we look into, but we need to go through the communication authority.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then Nazli, we have a few minutes left, and a question from Nazli.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and the discussion with the child abuse is really important. So maybe not a question, but maybe few an example from a national society. So what I'm thinking is, I mean, setting a referral mechanism is really important, but in order to refer, we need to identify. I think discussion around the child abuse is make us think that the identification is really hard, because there are so many issues like family level, traditional issues, the tendencies not being safe, or lack of services. These are all challenges for the identification. And also, after the identification, response is also staying as a problem, specifically for like specific problems. So maybe I'm thinking the community modalities, the how to respond and identify those cases can be an area that PGI and CEA collaboration can be useful. I mean, for example, in Turkish Red Crescent, and I was working for Turkish Red Crescent, and we are working with refugee children, mostly Syrian. So we identify so many issues at why children are not going to school, accessing to school, or why they are drop out. So one of the reasons, I mean, among many, we identify that children has no motivation. I mean, even though there are systems in place, there are the family is eager to send their children. So children has no motivation to go to school. So we are trying to find new modalities to make people to more motivated. So what we find as a modality, and working with UNICEF, the role model activities. So we are bringing children who were suffering from the same situation, but then motivate themselves somehow and presenting a success story. And we are bringing those children with the other children who are that we are working to access the children. So that examples, I think, can be a good one to think how PGI and CEA work together. Or we were trying to set up some committees, like women committees. So I think the important thing is to finding some methodologies to make people safe to speak up. I mean, both the parents and children. And I think the CEA has a great contribution to PGI on that point, to know the people's tendencies, to know traditions, and also to find out what are the people's coping mechanisms. Because, I mean, I'm sure that there are some families or women or like fathers, mothers, to find their own coping mechanism to end the child abuse in the families. But these are not visible. So I think CEA is create a way to find out those coping mechanisms within the society and meet those people with the other people's in need. So make them feel and speak up, maybe. So just, I want to share this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nazli. I think it brings back indeed to some of the points that Lithapelo was mentioning earlier around the different marginalized groups and how the CEA work did indeed help to make sure that the referral pathways were being as effective as possible. I don't know, Lithapelo, do you want to add anything on that point, just to coming to a close?
I think what she's mentioning is right. You see, the fact that CEA, if you do it appropriately and accordingly, by initially including the people who you are working for. That is the beneficiaries. Then you'll get it right. But if it is just on the documentation and on the paper, then it will not get it right. Now, I think from what Lesotho has done with time and awareness raising, it actually works to say, first bring the people on board, raise awareness, also have tools in place. Because we have documents, we have case identification forms, we have referral forms, we also have case management forms, even the reporting formats. Some are from the Lesotho Red Cross, some are from UNICEF. We even actually copied some from the IFRC, and we have some from the Ministry of Social Development and the police. Now, if we coordinate these mechanisms and we work together, then we will be able to reach the people. Well, it is true that we have to make people part of the solution, but in terms of neglect, abuse, and sexual exploitation, it is not easy to make somebody who has been abused part of the solution, because they are traumatized, they have anxiety on all those issues that I could mention relating to mental health. Now, this, you need to find solutions for them. You need people who will assist them. You need people who will calm them down. And you need to have a quick referral system so that they see the solution. They see that people are really noticing the challenges that they are in. Then that way they will cope. But without this support, then it comes worse. Now, we need to put it in the back of our mind to say that how best can we roll out this initiative so that people really get help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lithapelo. And we're coming to very much the last 2 minutes of this time that we had allocated. So in the last 1 minute, actually. So I think I will just end there by thanking the three of you very much for sharing your experience, and thanking indeed everybody who joined for sharing experience and asking good questions. As you will have perhaps seen, depending on how you receive the invitation, this is part of a series of what we call learning forums on PGI. And I think as you've seen, the idea is to have quite an informal way of discussing around these issues, where we're not really trying to achieve anything very much. It's not a workshop, it's not a training, and we're not trying to, but what we are trying to do is just to have that opportunity to share and to learn. And it's been, for me at least, very extremely interesting to hear these things from Southern Africa, and I think we saw a lot of common experiences. We will continue to run these, and you'll receive notifications about those. I'll share the recording of this one. And in particular, I think there's some issues that have come out of this around the, what Lithapelo calls, traditional ethical practices, traditional healers, and the impact of that on different PGI issues. We were thinking to try to do a sort of a regional collection of case studies on how national societies are addressing that issue. How do we work with the traditional healers, traditional practices, and minimize the harm as much as possible. So if you're interested to share more on that, please do contact me or Daniel or Petronella. I'll just put my email in the chat in case you don't already have it. But we'd be very interested to hear more on that from anywhere in the world, particularly in the Southern African region, to maybe have a common case study. And with that, yes, once again, just to thank you all very much for your time today, and hope to see you sometime in the future. And there will be more learning forums, hopefully in the next month. There should be one focused on Europe and others to come. So look out for those coming up. And if you're not part of the PGI community, do get in touch with us and we can link you up as much as possible. So thank you once again, and have a good rest of the day, everybody. And don't hesitate to be in touch. All the best, and good afternoon, good morning.
Hi, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.